There are 5 arguments and predictions by Professor Yuval Noah Harari in the video Yuval Noah Harari on COVID-19 Impacts on Humankind, published by host James Corden. The first argument by Professor Yuval is that the world condition after a pandemic depends on humans themselves and are not predetermined or determined. Second, trust is a crucial factor facing the pandemic. The third is significant changes could hit the institutional area, such as the job market and universities. Fourth is that the understanding of science is the way to overcome the pandemic. And lastly, Professor Yuval argued that the government using smartphone to monitor its people could be a good thing if appropriately utilized. These arguments are important to discuss because there is a potential society shifting on impact of COVID-19 on international, national, and institutional level, and why humankind must be vigilant of how technology could ultimately strip everyone of any form of privacy. The theory that fits Professor Yuval's argument in the video is constructivism. Because, like the first argument from Professor Yuval, the world conditions after a pandemic depend on humans themselves are not predetermined and determined. According to constructivism reports arguing or made in the social world on 1989, actors generally influential such as leaders and prominent citizens continuously form and often reshape through their action and interaction the very essence of international relations.
Next is our group's response to Professor Yuval's arguments and prediction. Our group agrees with Professor Yuval's first argument regarding the world's condition after the pandemic depends on humans themselves and is not predetermined and determined. At the start of the spread of COVID-19, many countries were late in taking preventive measures and blame one another, such as the United States and China, making predictions about the post-pandemic world condition uncertain. However, if countries around the world work together to prevent and combat the spread of COVID-19 from the start or even today, most likely the number of positive cases will not be as high as it is today. Therefore, as the first argument states, those countries' choice and actions could be among the most significant dangers we face post-pandemic. The second argument is trust as a key factor facing the pandemic. Following government instructions suggested by experts to prevent and reduce the spread of COVID-19 is critical. Many people do not believe or have different views on the COVID-19 situation. They feel the instruction regarding steps taken violate their right to liberty. However, trusting the government to adhere to health protocols is essential for everyone's safety in preventing and reducing the virus spread. We agree with the third argument by Professor Yuval regarding the transition from face-to-face to online creates a new environment with a different social atmosphere, even though, fundamentally, human nature will not change. The current generation affected by the change directly will significantly differ in social factors than the previous generation, which creates a new social atmosphere with the changing environment. An example that we see currently at our university is that more students are less sociable and have a high dependence on technology than the previous year due to changes in the environment and social atmosphere. Engagement between students and lecturers is starting to decrease and less, although it is more practical. Our group agrees with the fourth argument by Professor Yuval and want to add that we are in an age where science has developed rapidly and technology has become very sophisticated. These two things are essential in the current situation so that similar past crises do not happen again. Knowing and understanding the cause of disease and how to prevent it from spreading is easier and faster due to globalization. However, this also causes the spread of the virus to spread quicker and easier. And lastly, we do not fully support the last argument from Professor Yuval. The governments in a way tap smartphones for surveillance as a precaution can have more adverse and unwanted consequences. The government's ability to use it appropriately cannot be carried out over the long term consistently or even prevent cybercrime.
In this part, we would like to analyze all of Yuval's 5 predictions according to Indonesia and the country of our group, which is ASEAN. We would like to start with Indonesia. Yuval's prediction number 1. The world condition after the pandemic depends on the human being itself, and it's not predetermined or determined. We are the ones who make those choices. And our analysis is, as the leading country in the Southeast Asia region, Indonesia largely depended on and depended by other member states in the region in maintaining the sustainability of the supply chain. Indonesia continued to implement their robust active foreign policy, which enables them to respond to the pandemic productively by cooperating with both the United States and China without any hesitation. Indonesia currently boasts the 4th largest population in the world, and it is very sensible for Indonesia to react as rapidly as they could by conducting tighter cooperation in every sector to compensate for the loss due to COVID-19 effects. According to Yuval's arguments, it is true that Indonesia will have to make choices after choices to respond to the situation. Number 2. Trust is a key factor facing the pandemic. Without trust, we cannot work through the crisis effectively. Our analysis is, Indonesian societies used to have an enormous trust, which was proven by the fact that most Indonesians are obeying the government's policies by staying at home in the month of March to May. But after that, unjust actions made by ministers in the cabinet, such as corruption, manipulating numbers related to COVID, many people started to lose trust on the pandemic and the government itself and decided that it is not as dangerous as it seems. As a result, large number of people not staying at home as strict as it used to be. In order to grow trust, the government will have to be trustworthy as well and show the transparency and capability in handling the COVID issue so that people will then gradually trust the government completely. Number 3. Big changes could hit in the institutional area, in which job, market, and in the university. Our analysis is, Indonesia notably implemented all of online classes since the start of the pandemic. The governments are deeply concerned with the social interactions that has vanished since the implementation of online classes. According to students in Indonesia, they are eager for the offline classes to be back because online classes are mentally and physically draining. Indonesian governments are speeding up the supplies of vaccines in order to hasten up the offline classes so that students will be back to their normal lives and methods of study. Number 4. The understanding of science is the way to overcome the pandemic. Knowing what causes the disease and how to prevent it from spreading even further is what makes an improvement and the cause of pulling through on this pandemic. Our analysis is, Indonesia is also largely hampered by the ignorance of science, as many people put religion beyond science, and sometimes the tenets between them collide significantly. Especially the Muslim extremists such as FPI that believe that COVID could easily be cured by conducting the wudu. The government has tried their best in order to make everybody understand the severity of the pandemic, but these ignorant groups of people keep coming and transmitting viruses from one another without paying any attention to the scientific methods of avoiding the virus altogether. Number 5. Government using smartphones as a way to surveillance its own people could be a good thing if utilized properly. Our analysis is, most Indonesian people will object the use of smartphone as surveillance to the government because their independence as a human being will be gradually reduced to the points that the government set. And this indirectly violates the human rights that are declared upon the country's independence. Also, Indonesia are lacking in many aspects, and the funds would be better to be allocated elsewhere other than tracking more than 200 million people for surveillance reasons. And now we would like to analyze Yuval's predictions from the point of view of ASEAN. Prediction number 1. The world condition after the pandemic depends on the human being itself, and it's not predetermined or determined. We are the one who make those choices. And our analysis is, in line with Indonesia's foreign policy, ASEAN was established with the basis of neutrality and openness to every formally recognized country in the world. ASEAN also conducted cooperations with both China and the United States to compensate for the scarce resources that Yuval had explained. ASEAN solidarity along the years is one of the tightest in regional cooperation compared to others in the world. And with the sense of similarity between member states, hatred and grief will be very minimal, and member states will continue to urge of resource fulfillment to both themselves and the entire organization. Number 2. Trust is a key factor facing the pandemic. Without trust, we cannot go through the crisis effectively. Our analysis is, ASEAN, as a whole organization, done pretty well in terms of limiting the COVID-19, mainly Vietnam. The people in Vietnam put their full trust in their government, mainly because of the absence of the big religionist movement that enabled the government to persuade Vietnamese people to obey the policies. Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries notably struggled at the start but now are doing quite well, with their people putting trust on their capable government. However, that is not the case for Indonesia. After a series of corruptions made the government's legitimacy among people deteriorated. Number 3. Big changes could hit in the institutional area, in which job market and in the university. Our analysis is, ASEAN countries implemented region-wide social distancing policy, and some of the countries implemented total lockdown. Suicide rates skyrocketed since this was implemented due to the lack of human communication between students and universities. Students' mental health are damaged due to the prolonged intervals of online classes. All ASEAN countries are eager for offline classes to be back again, as most of students are also eager with it coming back. But ASEAN countries will not be able to implement the return of offline classes before the long process of vaccination is done. That is why ASEAN also staying neutral in the world stage in order to receive vaccines from both sides, be it China and its allies or United States and its allies. Number 4. The understanding of science is the way to overcome the pandemic. Knowing what causes the disease and how to prevent it from spreading even further is what makes an improvement and the cause of pulling through on this pandemic. Our analysis is, it is true that all humans would have to live with something that they're believing in, but member states need to give an understanding to their people that embracing 100% of religion and not giving any attention to the scientific research about the pandemic will result in a total catastrophe. ASEAN member states varies in how much they believe in God. Socialist states such as Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam have lower rates of ignorance, while Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand have higher rates of scientific ignorance that is caused by the over-fanatical beliefs of their own people. Number 5. Government using smartphones as a way to surveillance its own people could be a good thing if utilized properly. Our analysis is, ASEAN believes in the ASEAN way, which guarantees the independence and openness of member states and their people. Putting surveillance in every person's smartphone will only damage their independence and therefore also betrays the point in the ASEAN Declaration. Mass resistance will also possibly happen if the governments try to plan excessive surveillance on its people. Also, as Asian countries are most of them still developing, the funds would be better off allocated elsewhere. That was the analysis from UFA's prediction. Thank you.
COVID-19 pandemic has changed our usual behavior day-to-day as human interaction is supposed to be limited. Health protocol has been implemented and mobilization is restricted. All of the new norms emerged as a response to adapt to the pandemic. Before the pandemic, the government encouraged people to explore the world by traveling, which boosts the local economic growth. Today, there are travel bans and a variety of restrictions to cross the nation's border. Now everyone needs to follow certain rules just to go to the nearest supermarket, and even more difficult to go across the border, which slow down the progress of globalization. Although the pandemic changed human social interaction, it will not change human nature, that we are still social creatures who needs contact. Therefore, we adapt. We seek a new path in efforts to be connected. The globalization makes states more interconnected and interdependent to each other. With pandemic, which caused so many restrictions to have cross-border interaction, we adapt by using our best resources. The internet. We create a new realm where it is borderless. The internet is used as a coping mechanism during the pandemic. The future of social interaction will be much more easier for us now than ever, since we literally have all of the resources to stay interconnected. All of us have access to the internet, which allow us to communicate with anyone regardless where the other person is. Advanced technology allows us to mingle virtually that we don't have to physically move just to talk to the person that we want. Nowadays, the government traces people movement not only physically through surveillance, but in the internet world too, such as our behavior in social media, our interaction virtually, and what we buy through the marketplace. Governments also do underscan surveillance with checking our temperature wherever we go. We are more dependent on technology than ever. Therefore, we should keep an eye for cybersecurity. Globalization is still happening, regardless the physical movement restrictions. We are just shifting our physical behavior to the behavior we do on the internet.
So regarding the questions, what is our group think towards who will be the new hegemony in the future? As you can see that according to the principle of aggressive realism, it is normal for a great power like China to seek the regional influence that the United States presently retains in the Western Hemisphere. Today, after nearly 30 years of remarkable economic growth, China is once again positioned to take its place as the international hegemon and potentially becoming the world's next superpower. Moving to the role of being a regional hegemon with no peer rivals and its own backyard will allow it the potential to shift the balance of power in other regions of the world. It is undoubtedly the collapse of China's regional influence in the mid-19th century and the resulting century of humiliation that demonstrated these points perfectly. It aims to address the possible deployment of American force within the contested waters of the first island chain. The freedom of movement of naval force in the East and South China Sea is crucial. As Eva's Hanlin points out, China's ability to keep the US Navy away from East Asian waters constituted as necessary and almost sufficient condition for China's bid for regional hegemony. Aircraft in any dispute within the first island chain, which will drive the US away from the China's mainland, hinders organizational stability. Trade with China is crucial to the development of countries' alliance of Southeast Asian nations, given the scale of China's still growing middle class. It is clear that ASEAN needs the China's market more than China needs it. We can conclude that the United States will remain a world superpower, but China had been ruling force in East Asia for decades before Western colonizations in the 19th century.